It was Christmas Eve, a night that should have been filled with joy and warmth. I hadn't expected to come home to this. The moment I stepped out of the car, the chill in the air hit me like a punch to the gut. Chicago winters were nothing new to me, but something about the cold tonight felt different. It wasn't just the wind, it was the sudden, overwhelming weight of what I was about to face. As I walked toward the front door of my daughter's house, my heart pounded. Sophie had been in touch earlier, but her voice had trembled with something I couldn't place, fear maybe. She was distant, distracted. She had been in a rough patch lately, dealing with pressure from Mark's family over the one thing they couldn't control, her inability to have children. But tonight, something felt off. I pushed the door open with a sense of dread. The sight that met me froze my blood. There she was, Sophie, my baby, huddled outside on the porch, her small frame shivering uncontrollably. The temperature was in the low 30s. She was barely dressed in a thin sweater, her hair matted with snowflakes, and her face pale as though the cold had sucked the life out of her. No blanket, no jacket, no warmth. My breath caught in my throat. What in God's name was happening? Why was my daughter out here? I rushed to her every step in that thick snow, feeling like it was leading me to some dark, unavoidable truth. "Sophie!" I shouted, kneeling beside her. Her eyes fluttered open, her lips barely moving as she whispered, "Mom." I couldn't take it anymore. I didn't need to ask what happened. It was clear. The house was filled with the warmth of holiday cheer, Mark's family inside, toasting with champagne, laughing. I could hear their voices muffled but unmistakable from where I stood. Not a single one of them had cared enough to check on Sophie, to ask her how she was, or to offer her a place by the fire. My heart was breaking. But that was nothing compared to the rage building inside me. What kind of family treats their own like this? A daughter-in-law barely a part of the family, treated like a ghost, discarded in the cold, while they celebrated their merry little Christmas. I wrapped my coat around Sophie, trying to stop my hands from shaking. "We're leaving. Now," I said firmly, lifting her gently in my arms. My voice was strong, but inside I felt like I was crumbling. I had spent years away trying to make a life for myself, thinking Sophie was safe. I had trusted them. And now I felt utterly betrayed. As I stepped into the house, my mind raced. How could Mark allow this? How could Betty, his mother, be so cruel? I was ready to confront them all, but at that moment I could hardly contain the tears that threatened to spill. Sophie was my priority now. Her pain, her suffering, it was all I could think about. I couldn't just let this slide. No more silence. No more letting them sweep her pain under the rug. It was time to make them see what they'd done. I wasn't just going to be a bystander anymore. I turned toward the living room where the family still laughed, oblivious to the torment outside. I could feel my heartbeat in my ears. The silence inside the house was deafening. I took a deep breath, knowing I couldn't hold back anymore. This wasn't just a family issue. This was my daughter's life, and I wasn't about to let them destroy it. I held Sophie tightly in my arms, feeling her fragile body trembling against mine. The warmth of my coat barely registered in her cold, numb skin, but I didn't care. I could only think about one thing now: I had to protect her. The image of her left alone outside while the family celebrated inside burned in my mind. How could they do this to her? To my daughter? The anger was rising, but it was more than anger. It was a rush of protectiveness, of love, of a mother's primal need to shield her child from harm. I turned and walked toward the living room, the door still wide open behind me. The laughter and chatter from Mark's family spilled into the night air, almost mocking me. I could hear Betty's voice, sharp, loud, followed by Mark's deep, carefree laughter. The sound twisted something inside me. I couldn't let them keep doing this. Not to Sophie. Not anymore. I stopped at the threshold, my hand still gripping the door handle, my breath heavy in my chest. I glanced at Sophie. Her eyes, red and raw, met mine. She barely whispered, "Mom, don't. Please." Her voice was weak, like she wasn't sure if she even had the strength to keep fighting. But I did. I had all the strength we needed. "Stay here, sweetheart," I said, my voice low but firm. "I'm going in. And I won't let them hurt you anymore." I pushed the door open wider and stepped into the warmth of the room. The heat hit me like a wave, but it felt suffocating, almost like it didn't belong to me. It wasn't my warmth. It was the warmth of people who had abandoned their humanity. The moment I entered, the chatter stopped. All eyes turned to me, and I saw the surprise, the discomfort flickering across their faces. They hadn't expected me, of course not. Why would they? After all, I'd been gone for years, only to return and stir up the perfect little bubble of their so-called holiday. But there was no going back. Clara, what are you doing here? Betty's voice rang out with that fake sweetness, like she couldn't possibly understand why I would come crashing into their perfect evening. Her eyes narrowed as she took in the scene, Sophie pale and shaken behind me. I took a deep breath. I'm here for my daughter, I said, my words coming out sharp, clear. And I will not stand by while you and your son treat her like this. The room was dead silent now. Mark looked uncomfortable, his hand twitching slightly at his side, but he didn't speak. He didn't need to. His silence spoke volumes. He had no words for the things his family had done to Sophie. He couldn't even look her in the eyes. You left her outside, I continued, my voice louder now, the anger pouring out. You let her freeze in the cold while you sat here enjoying your holiday. Do you have any idea what kind of pain she's in? What kind of emotional hell you've put her through? Betty scoffed, her lips curling into a tight smile, dismissive. Clara, really, Sophie's fine. She just likes to make a scene like always. She's probably just looking for attention as usual. Her words cut through the air like knives meant to belittle, to strip Sophie of any dignity she might have left. I felt my body tense, the heat of fury rushing through me, but I wasn't going to back down. Not this time. You think she's faking it. You think she's asking for this. I turned toward Sophie, who was now standing behind me, her eyes wide but filled with a new sense of quiet strength. She didn't need me to fight for her anymore, but I couldn't help it. I couldn't leave her alone in this fight. I turned back to Betty. You don't get to treat her like this. Not anymore. I'm done letting you control her life. This is not your house, and you sure as hell don't get to decide her worth. For a moment, everything was still. I could feel the tension building, thick and suffocating in the air. Mark finally spoke, his voice low, barely audible, but it was enough. Clara, this isn't your business. You don't understand the situation. No, I snapped, stepping closer, my voice rising. You don't understand. This is my daughter, and she's not some pawn in your family's game. I will make sure of that. I could see the shift in their faces. Betty's smug expression faltered slightly. Mark's eyes hardened, and Daryl, the cousin who had been sitting silently at the table, shifted uneasily in his chair. They didn't expect this. They didn't expect me to show up and make it public. But I wasn't going to be silent anymore. Sophie was more than enough reason to break the silence, to make them hear every word, every accusation. My heart was racing, but the fire in my chest was stronger than the fear. This was it. There was no turning back now. And I wasn't leaving without Sophie. I was done being a quiet observer. I was her mother, and no one, not even them, was going to break her spirit again. The silence in the room stretched on, thick and suffocating. My heart was still pounding, but the anger had settled into something deeper, something darker. Watching them standing there like nothing was wrong was unbearable. Betty's eyes, narrow and calculating, never left me. She tilted her head slightly, as though she were trying to read me, trying to figure out how far I would go. Well, Clara, she finally said, her voice dripping with that sickly sweet politeness that made my skin crawl. You've always been the dramatic one. I see your daughter is following right in your footsteps. A pity. So much potential wasted on this sensitivity. Her words were sharp, each one a calculated jab designed to wound Sophie and by extension me. She had done this before, always undermining Sophie, always making her feel less than. A failure. I could feel the heat rising in my chest, the urge to lash out almost overwhelming. But I kept my ground. I had to. Sophie was standing behind me, trembling but resolute, and I couldn't let this moment slip by. Not again. This time I was the one who would make them see. Do you think this is funny, Betty? I asked, my voice shaking with both fury and disbelief. Do you think it's amusing to watch your daughter-in-law break down, to dismiss her pain like it doesn't matter? She didn't flinch. Instead, she crossed her arms, a smug smile creeping onto her face. She's the one who can't bear children, Clara. She's the one who's been dragging this family down. How long are we supposed to tiptoe around her feelings? She's lucky we haven't kicked her out already. Her words cut through the air, each one a dagger. I could see the cruelty in her eyes, the lack of empathy that had become a constant in her treatment of Sophie. She didn't care. She never had. I glanced at Mark, hoping, praying that he would stand up for his wife, that he would see the injustice in his mother's words. But no. His eyes were downcast, his arms crossed, leaning back slightly as if trying to disappear into the furniture. He hadn't said a word, not one word to defend Sophie, not one word to tell his mother to stop. The man I had once hoped would be her protector. Her partner was now just as cold and indifferent as the woman who birthed him. Mark's silence spoke volumes. He wasn't even looking at Sophie, and I could feel her retreating behind me, her shoulders slumping as though the weight of their cruelty was too much for her to bear. My heart ached for her. This was supposed to be a place of love, of family. Instead, it felt like a cage. I swallowed hard, my throat thick with emotion. How could he allow this? How could he stand there indifferent while his mother tore his wife apart? I felt a wave of betrayal so strong it was hard to breathe. Mark. I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but it was enough to cut through the tension. How long are you going to let her do this? How long are you going to stand by and let your mother destroy the woman you claim to love? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he shifted in his seat, running a hand through his hair, his face flushed with a mix of discomfort and guilt. Finally, he mumbled, "It's not that simple, Mom. You don't understand." I laughed bitterly. "Not that simple. You don't even see it, do you? You don't even care enough to see it. You're letting your mother break her down. You're letting her suffer, and you're doing nothing about it." Sophie's breathing hitched behind me. I turned just in time to see the tears starting to fall from her eyes. It was all too much for her. The weight of their cruelty was unbearable. "No more, Mark," I said firmly, turning back to face him. "You've had your chance to fix this, to stand by her. But this is where I draw the line. You're either with us or you're not." The room went dead silent, and for the first time, Mark finally met Sophie's gaze. But it was too late. The damage had already been done. I took a deep breath, pushing past the suffocating tension. I wasn't leaving without Sophie, and I wouldn't let this family destroy her anymore. As the tension in the room thickened, my thoughts drifted back to another time, another chapter in Sophie's life, one where I wasn't there to protect her. The years had been long and difficult, full of missed calls, unanswered texts, and moments I couldn't undo. I remember the first time Sophie had called me crying after she had married Mark. Her voice had been so fragile, like glass shattering in the silence. "Mama, they don't get it," she had said between sobs. "Mark's family. They don't care about me. I'm invisible here. I can't do this anymore. I can't breathe." I had tried so hard to comfort her over the phone, to bridge the miles between us, but it never seemed like enough. I was in California, working endless hours at the hospital, building a life for myself after my divorce from John, Sophie's father. The distance between us had grown in ways I couldn't control. The guilt I felt back then was sharp and cutting, like a constant ache in my chest that never fully healed. The divorce had been hard on both of us. John and I had tried for years to make things work, but the cracks had deepened. I had never imagined Sophie would have to grow up without a father in the house, without a consistent figure of strength beside her. I tried my best to fill that void, but the truth was, I couldn't be everything for her. And when she married Mark, I hoped that he would be the one to protect her, to give her the support she deserved. Instead, it seemed like he had become yet another source of disappointment. My mind wandered back to those lonely calls from Sophie in the early years of her marriage. I could hear her voice cracked with frustration as she described how her heart ached every time Mark turned a blind eye to her pain. I heard how his family, especially Betty, the woman who had claimed Sophie as her own daughter-in-law, treated her as if she were nothing more than a burden. The pain she carried those nights alone in the house while Mark worked late, the overwhelming sense of abandonment from his family, the crushing weight of infertility had been suffocating. I should have seen it. I should have known. But I hadn't been there. I hadn't been close enough. I was too busy, too caught up in my own life. I had hoped Sophie would find her way, that Mark would be the husband she deserved. But I was wrong. And now, here we were. Years of pain had led to this moment, this public confrontation with the people who had broken her. The memory of those calls echoed in my mind, and I felt an overwhelming sense of regret. I had failed her. I hadn't been there when she needed me most. I should have seen the signs, should have noticed how her eyes darkened with sadness, how her smile faded a little more each time I spoke to her. Tears threatened to fall, but I wiped them away quickly. No more tears, no more regrets. Sophie had suffered enough, and it was time to stand up for her, to fight back against the people who had treated her like she didn't matter. I turned to face Sophie, standing behind me now, her hands clenched at her sides. Her eyes, though filled with sorrow, held a spark of something stronger, something that hadn't been there before. She was no longer the broken girl who had called me in desperation. She was stronger. She was ready to fight. This was her moment. This was our moment. No more, I said firmly, as much to myself as to them. We're done. We're done pretending this is normal. You're not a burden. You're not broken. You're my daughter, and I'll be damned if I let anyone make you feel like less than that. The silence that followed was deafening, but I didn't care. I wasn't backing down, and neither was Sophie. This time we would fight for her together. I stood there, my heart racing in my chest, staring at Mark and Betty. Sophie was behind me, her hands trembling, but her stance more solid than I had ever seen. She was ready. And I had to be too. I wasn't just standing here for myself anymore. I was standing for her. For the daughter I had raised, for the young woman who had endured too much silence, too much pain. Betty's smile, if you could call it that, widened slightly, as though she found our confrontation amusing. She didn't take me seriously. She never had. But this time it was different. I wasn't the mother on the phone offering comforting words from a distance. I wasn't the person who stood idly by thinking Sophie could handle it on her own. No, not anymore. Clara, calm down, Betty said in her syrupy voice, the one that always masked her cruelty. You're overreacting. Sophie has always been sensitive, and we've tried to help her, but you know how it is. Some people just aren't cut out for this. I felt the fury rising in my chest, but I pushed it down. I wasn't going to let her dismiss Sophie like this again. I wasn't going to let her make it sound like Sophie was the problem, when in reality it was Betty and Mark who had failed her. Stop it, I said sharply, stepping forward, forcing myself to meet Betty's cold gaze. No more excuses. No more pretending that you've done enough for her. You've torn her down. And I'm done pretending it's not happening. Mark, who had been silent until now, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He looked up at me, but there was nothing in his eyes. Nothing to show he had any understanding of the depth of Sophie's pain or the depth of my frustration. He just looked exhausted. I wanted to scream at him, to shake him awake, to make him see the woman standing beside him. The woman he was supposed to protect was crumbling under the weight of his mother's cruelty and his indifference. You're not the solution, Mark. I continued, my voice a little calmer, but just as firm. You're part of the problem. You've stood by while she's been treated like this, like she doesn't matter. And I won't let you keep pretending it's okay. You've got one choice. Now you're either with her or you're against her. But I will not sit back and watch this happen anymore. Mark's face flushed with something close to anger, embarrassment maybe, but it wasn't enough. Not nearly enough. He wasn't angry at his mother for what she had done to his wife. He wasn't angry at the situation. He was angry at me for calling him out. That was the truth of it, and that only made me more determined. I'll take this as far as I have to, I said, my voice low but carrying an unmistakable weight. If you don't stop this, if you don't treat her like your family, like your wife, I'll take you to court. I'll take everything you have. I'll expose every ugly truth about how you've treated her. You think I won't? You think I'll let this slide? There was a pause. A moment where everything hung in the air, thick with tension. I could see Betty's face harden, the warmth in her eyes fading, replaced by something sharper, more defensive. But I didn't flinch. I wasn't backing down, not this time. Sophie, standing behind me, moved to my side. Her eyes no longer filled with that same silent resignation I had seen in her earlier. She looked up at me, and for the first time in years, I saw something in her eyes I hadn't seen in a long time. Hope. Hope that she didn't have to do this alone anymore. Hope that she didn't have to live in the shadows of their cruelty any longer. I've had enough, Sophie whispered, her voice shaky but determined. I won't live like this anymore. I won't let you destroy me. I squeezed her hand, a silent promise that we would get through this together. I wasn't just fighting for her freedom, I was fighting for her future. and I would never let them take that from her again. Betty's face twisted a mixture of disbelief and anger, but she didn't say anything. She knew. She knew I meant every word. And for the first time, Mark seemed to realize just how much he had lost, how much he had failed. The air in the room felt heavy, like the storm had finally reached its breaking point. And now we would see just how much they were willing to lose. Because I wasn't going anywhere. Neither was Sophie. And together we would make them see. The days after our confrontation felt like a blur, a whirlwind of emotions that I couldn't quite catch hold of. But one thing was certain, there was no going back. Sophie and I had made a decision. We were going to fight. We were going to take this battle to court, and we would make sure that Betty, Mark, and their toxic treatment of my daughter would be exposed for the world to see. The very thought of it made my stomach twist with anxiety. I knew how powerful they were, how deeply entrenched they were in their community, in their circles. I could already hear the whispers, the judgment, the quiet murmurings about the broken family making waves. But none of that mattered now. Sophie's well-being was the only thing that mattered. Peter, our lawyer, was a quiet man with sharp eyes. He had helped me with a few legal matters over the years, and when I called him about Sophie, he didn't hesitate for a second. He understood the weight of what we were dealing with, even if we didn't fully grasp how complex this battle would be. He met us at his office, a small, dimly lit space filled with stacks of paperwork. He asked questions about everything: Sophie's marriage to Mark, the strained relationship with Betty, the phone calls, the nasty messages. It felt like reliving the past all over again, the pain, the helplessness. But it had to be done. We couldn't keep living in the shadows, pretending nothing was happening when everything around us was falling apart. "You've got to gather everything," Peter said, his voice low but clear as he sifted through the notes I had prepared. Text messages, emails, any phone calls, anything that shows a pattern of mistreatment, emotional abuse. The more we have, the stronger our case will be. I felt my chest tighten. Every piece of evidence felt like a weight pressing down on me. Each text message from Betty, condescending, dismissive. Every call from Mark where he told Sophie she was overreacting, that she was too sensitive. It wasn't just the words, it was the complete lack of empathy, the utter disregard for her pain. I had seen it all, but seeing it laid out in front of me in black and white felt like I was suffocating. Sophie, sitting beside me, was quieter than usual. Her hands were clenched in her lap, her shoulders hunched. I could see how much this was costing her, how much it had cost her over the years. It hurt to know I couldn't have stopped it sooner. But I was here now, and I wasn't going to let her go through this alone. "We're going to do this, Sophie," I whispered to her, my voice shaky. "We're going to make sure they can't hurt you anymore." She nodded slowly, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and determination. "I'm scared, Mom. What if they turn it all around? What if they make me look crazy?" I reached over, squeezing her hand, trying to reassure her with a smile. "They won't. We've got the truth on our side, and we're not going to let them make you doubt yourself anymore." But even as I said the words, doubt crept in. I couldn't help but wonder, was this the right choice? Was I doing the right thing by dragging this painful truth into the open? Could we handle what would come next? The thought of facing them in court with all their lies and manipulation made my stomach churn. Still, there was no turning back now. We had taken the first step. Sophie deserved better than this, better than being silenced by fear, better than being reduced to nothing by people who should have loved her. She deserved peace, and I would do whatever it took to give it to her. As Peter began to prepare the paperwork, I could feel the weight of what we were about to embark on. It was going to be a fight, a long and difficult one. But for the first time in a long time, I felt something other than fear. I felt hope. And that for me was worth everything. The courtroom was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that presses down on you until it feels like you can't breathe. Sophie and I sat there side by side, our hands clenched tightly together, but neither of us spoke. The tension in the room was thick, like the air itself had turned to lead, and I could feel my heart racing as I stared at the judge. Peter, our lawyer, had prepared us as best he could. He had gathered all the evidence, texts, phone calls, the emotional scars left on Sophie after years of neglect, gaslighting, and cruel treatment. We thought we were ready. We thought the truth was on our side. But as I looked around the courtroom, I couldn't shake the feeling that the truth didn't matter here. Mark, sitting on the other side of the room, looked as cold and indifferent as I had ever seen him. I had hoped, no, I had believed that when push came to shove, he would see what was truly important, that he would realize the damage done to Sophie by his mother, that he would take a stand for his wife. But instead I saw him shift uncomfortably in his chair, glancing at Betty with that familiar, powerless look he wore whenever she was around. And in that moment I knew. He had already chosen. He had chosen his mother. My stomach twisted with a mixture of anger and betrayal, but I wasn't going to show it. Not now, not in front of Sophie. I squeezed her hand harder, hoping she could feel the strength I was trying to send her way. The judge finally spoke, his voice stern but emotionless. The court has reviewed the evidence. He began, glancing at the papers in front of him. While there is sufficient evidence to support the claims of emotional distress, this court does not find clear grounds for domestic abuse. The defendant, Mark Whitaker, will retain joint custody of the child, with Sophie Whitaker granted primary custody. My breath caught in my throat. For a moment, I couldn't process what he was saying. Joint custody. After everything. After all we had shown, the betrayal, the neglect, the emotional abuse Sophie had suffered, how could they say this wasn't abuse? The words felt like they were coming from somewhere far away, muffled by the rage that surged through me. My head spun. I glanced at Sophie. Her face was pale, her eyes wide, like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. Her grip on my hand tightened, but I could feel her whole body tremble. Mark didn't even look at her. Not once. His eyes were on the judge, his expression guarded, as though none of this really mattered to him. To him, it was all just a game he was winning. The judge continued, but his words blurred in my ears. I could feel my pulse in my throat, and I struggled to breathe as the reality of what was happening settled in. This was it. This was the moment where everything I had hoped for came crashing down. The system, the thing we had trusted to protect Sophie, had failed her. It had failed us. Sophie, in her quiet, fragile voice, spoke up. "But I'm not safe," she said, barely above a whisper. I could hear the pain in her voice, the vulnerability that no one in this room seemed to understand. The judge looked at her, expression unmoving. "This court cannot rule on allegations without sufficient evidence of physical harm. Custody arrangements will remain as is." I wanted to scream. I wanted to stand up and tell him that this wasn't just about physical harm. It was about a mother's cruelty, about emotional violence that left scars far deeper than any bruise could. But I stayed quiet. I stayed still, my hands shaking in Sophie's. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. We had thought the truth would matter. We had thought that at the very least, Sophie would be heard. But in that moment, I saw the truth. They didn't care. The system, the court, the family, they all turned a blind eye. They all allowed Sophie to be silenced, to be pushed aside once again. I looked at Sophie, her face a mask of disbelief. My heart broke for her. This wasn't just a failure of the system, it was a failure of love. The people who were supposed to protect her had done nothing but reinforce the walls around her. But as I sat there staring at my daughter's broken face, I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't stop fighting. This wasn't over. It couldn't be. Not for Sophie, not while there was still breath in my lungs. Sophie squeezed my hand, her voice trembling. I thought they would see. I thought they would help me. "We'll find another way," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I won't stop. Not now, not ever." And as I looked at the judge, at Mark and Betty, I made a silent vow I would make them see the truth, even if it meant bringing the fight into the open, even if it meant tearing down everything they thought they knew about control and power. I wasn't done. Sophie wasn't done. And we would fight this together. The weeks after the trial felt like a long, slow exhale. We were still reeling from the blow of the court's decision, the sting of betrayal from the system, from Mark, from everyone who had let us down. But as time passed, I noticed something in Sophie. It was subtle at first, a quiet shift. The sadness in her eyes didn't seem as heavy. Her shoulders, which had always been so tense and guarded, were beginning to relax just a little. It wasn't a sudden change, but it was there. Little by little, Sophie was starting to reclaim parts of herself she had lost in the years of emotional abuse. We were no longer just survivors of a broken system. We were beginning to heal. Peter, our lawyer, had been a constant support, not just legally but emotionally. He had helped us find a small house in the suburbs of Chicago, a place far away from the memories of Mark and Betty's house. It wasn't much, just a cozy two-bedroom home with a small garden out back. But for the first time in a long time, it felt like a safe place, a place where we could breathe. Sophie had always been a quiet soul, but she had never truly had the chance to express herself. She had always wanted to draw to create, but the pressure from Mark's family and her own insecurities had kept her from pursuing that dream. Now, in this new chapter, she was finally starting to find her voice through art. She began attending therapy sessions, learning to open up about the pain she had buried for so long, and through that, she found something beautiful, her love for painting. I watched her one afternoon sitting at the kitchen table with a canvas in front of her, her paintbrush moving across it with purpose, her eyes focused and calm. There was a light in her that hadn't been there before, quiet, yes, but undeniable. It was like watching a flower bloom after years of being buried in the dark. She was finding herself again. And for me, it was the same. I had spent so much time focusing on the fight, on the anger and the injustice, that I had forgotten what it meant to live, to truly live. But now, in this new home, I was learning how to breathe again. Sophie and I were learning how to build something new from the ashes of everything we had lost. There were days when the pain still crept up on us, when the memories of the trial, of the betrayal, felt fresh again. But then I would look at Sophie, her face lit up with concentration, as she worked on a new painting, and I would remember that we had found something real. We had found the strength to move forward together. "Look, Mom," Sophie said one evening, holding up a painting of a sunset, soft, vibrant colors swirling together. "I think this is the first one I've really finished." I smiled, my heart swelling. "It's beautiful, sweetheart. You did this, all on your own." In that moment, I realized something I hadn't truly understood before. Our fight had never been about winning in court. It had never been about proving who was right or wrong. It had always been about protecting Sophie's spirit, about giving her the chance to rebuild her life and her identity. And now she was doing just that. We were starting fresh. We were healing. The past could never be undone, but the future was ours to shape. I looked at Sophie, her face full of determination, and for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. The storm had passed and we had made it through, together. And now we would move forward into whatever came next, knowing we could handle it. This was just the beginning, and no matter what, we would face it together.